Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Richard Fleming, and today is Friday, the 11th of December, 2020. Yesterday, the subcommittee met for the FDA and, by a majority vote, approved the vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Social media and the standard media lit up as expected, with those concerned about vaccines concerned and the people looking for a vaccine to allow this nightmare of COVID-19 to end elated. Their concerns, of course, was that there wasn't enough vaccine. One of the first principles in science and in medicine is to provide evidence of what you're saying is true or not. A classic example that I like to use with my students is somebody runs into a classroom and says, there was just an accident outside and this bus ran into two women on bicycles who were carrying babies, and the women are in the street bleeding and the babies are not moving. What do you know? And students will frequently say, there were two women with babies outside who got hit by a bus and the babies aren't moving and potentially are dead, and this is a disaster and we should go do something. The truth is, all you know is that somebody ran into the room and told you that. It could have been two dolls that the women were carrying, not babies. It could have been tomatoes in a basket that spilled out and looks like blood on the street. It could have been two women on motorcycles or mopeds. Could have been a man and a woman. Could have been a truck that hit them. It might have been none of the above. It might have been the person waking up out of a solid sleep and having a nightmare who ran into the room thinking they saw something legitimate, or frankly, it could just be somebody lying to you because they wanted to see if they could get your attention. Perhaps they wanted you to leave the room for some unknown reason, or perhaps they just thought it was funny. You don't know anything unless you go observe it for yourself. In medical school, we were constantly harped on, doctor, just because the radiologist or the lab said that the test was positive, how do you know? Did you go look at the test? Did you look at the x-ray to see if there was a bullet in the chest? Or did you look to see if there was a hole in the heart that caused a pericardial effusion that was putting the patient into cardiac tamponade and threatening their life? How do you know the patient stopped breathing? Unless you actually go and observe it for yourself, you don't know if what they think they're seeing is true, and you don't even know if there's evidence to support it. After 52 years of research, every piece of data that I've ever collected has been validated and proven to be correct and accurate by people either using an analysis method of it or by the reproduction of the results with somebody else. Our very own SARS-CoV-2 research that is currently being reviewed has raw redacted data that is sent into the journals for them to have at their fingertips, knowing how important this is. And it is data, measured outcome data, that will be available to any clinician or scientific researcher involved in the care and treatment of SARS-CoV-2 patients. I want them to know what the results are, and I want them to make decisions. It also allows them an opportunity to repeat, if they choose to, and validate or find differences. Yesterday's information approved by the FDA said that there was a T cell and antibody response, and specifically on the Vaccines and Related Biology Products Advisory Committee December 10, 2020 papers, all 53 pages. If you go to page 51, somebody who's clearly not a scientist decided to respond that, I believe the message was, I must not know what I'm talking about when I say there is no measurement data about the presence of T cell responses or antibodies from these vaccines. And they quoted for me that, quote, most participants who received both doses of BNT 162b2, that's the name of the vaccine, had evidence of SARS-CoV-2 S protein specific CD4, 39 of 39 or 100%, and CD8, 35 of 39, 89.7% T cell responses. Wow. Sounds great until you realize there's no data to back that up. In this 53-page monolith, there's no data to support that. Someone ran into the room and said 2 women on a bicycle carrying babies were hit by a bus, and you believe them. I think that's important because in the case of the 2 women and the babies, their lives are involved. In the instance of this virus, there's more than 1.5 million people that have died from the consequences of this virus. I think this is an important issue. Not having the data to back up their statement takes a lot of testicular matter. And for somebody to suggest that I'm not reading the papers properly shows foolishness and a lack of scientific knowledge. These vaccines may work. I hope that they do. But frankly, as a scientist and as a physician, until you provide me data that shows that, I wouldn't put it through, raising serious questions about the individuals who did vote for this. Yesterday, also, the Australian government apparently put the brakes on a vaccine being developed there because of what it called false HIV test results. If you've been watching this podcast and paying any attention to the material in the books that I've been publishing and the papers I've been publishing, you will know that one of the 2 inserts put into this naturally occurring virus by human beings was an HIV insert. So if the vaccine being used in Australia has that component of the virus in it, they didn't end up with a false positive HIV test. It was a true positive HIV test. We have no idea if the vaccine that's being produced by Pfizer or Moderna or any of the others have these same components because they haven't talked about it. And they haven't provided any information about whether they looked for any HIV antibodies as a result of their vaccine. But to be fair, they haven't provided any solid data showing that they have antibodies to anything. And CD4 and CD8 are T cells, helper and suppressor cells, of which they provided no data on that. They simply said 39 of the 39 had a CD4 response, 35 of the 39 had a CD8 response. They provided no measurements and no further information. When you have measurements like this, by the way, and you're saying that that means that there's a positive result, you also have to have a cutoff, something that less than that you say is okay or negative, and above that is positive, in this case, significant antibody. We do that for every test that there is. Take cholesterol example, total cholesterol less than 150, most people don't worry about it. Total cholesterol more than 150, most people start to worry about it. It's a cutoff. There's no discussion of a cutoff for these T cell responses or antibody responses, which, by the way, would be defined in titers. That's the conventional way for which you define an antibody response. Every physician out there who's been trained in a medical school and was awake to hear the classes knows that titers are the way that we report antibodies. As you dilute the blood more and more, you see how much dilution the blood can have and still have antibodies. The more you can dilute it and still have the antibodies, the more antibodies there are. There's no data on that. And yet the FDA approved these vaccines. Now, this isn't the first time the FDA has botched up. I've called them on the carpet several times. I've addressed the hemopump by Johnson & Johnson as being statistically invalid the way the studies were done, showing no beneficial outcome or improvement. I've demonstrated the fact that the drug Sestamib by the Lantheus Corporation does in fact redistribute and therefore should not be marketed as a 2 radiation dose drug to be used by people. I've brought to their attention the Bracco rubidium 82 generator for leaking twice in my history of presenting things to the FDA, and in none of those instances did the FDA take action. Now, with the rubidium 82 generator, they did finally give in and pull it off the market for a while. With Lantheus, they turned around and said, well, Lantheus does say that the drug redistributes, even though they continue to tell doctors to use 2 doses. And on the hemopump, well, fortunately, that thing has essentially not won favor and potentially caused problems with patients. So, not thanks to the FDA, but thanks to other individuals like myself pushing the limit, that information has come out. Now, unfortunately, the FDA is going to continue to push these drugs through. And the FDA is going to continue to ignore the data presented to them by people about treatments for SARS-CoV-2 because it's just not apparently what they're interested in dealing with. The motives of that has to be addressed to the FDA. All of that aside, one of the interesting things that scientists have done over the years, although sometimes people think we're nuts for doing it, is when we firmly believe something needs to be researched, we'll test it on ourselves first. Among the many studies looking at hydroxychloroquine, I find it interesting to note that many of the doctors who promote it, and they're doctors that by and large don't quite have the scientific research to perhaps support in the way that somebody like myself would like to see. These doctors have put their money where their mouth is, or their lives where their patients' lives are. They've actually taken hydroxychloroquine. And to the best of my knowledge, none of them have died. Raising the question, if the people at the FDA, these government agency people in positions of power, believe this vaccine is safe, I think they should be vaccinated first. I think they should be vaccinated. I think the people at the companies who make these vaccines should be vaccinated. And I think the judges that will be responsible for hearing what to do with anybody who doesn't take these vaccines should be vaccinated. These individuals and their families should be first in line to demonstrate to us just how safe they think these drugs are, these vaccines are, in the same way that the doctors who've taken hydroxychloroquine and these other drugs have provided us with them as an example for how safe they believe those drugs are.